Well, we're here reporting from Gilead, but Kaitlyn has started with reversing hearing loss. And I actually saw this one before. I'm pretty excited. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, this is going to be great for a lot of people because hearing loss is one of the things that sort of happens to everybody. Go on. You were going to say?
What was that?
Hearing loss happens. I get it. Thank you, Sam. Yeah. So hearing loss is one of those things that happens to basically everyone as you age. Basically, what happens is that inside the inner ear, hair follicles sort of die off, and those are the things that pick up sound, and they don't grow back. And so what you'll find is that as you age, you'll hear less and less high-pitched noises. Eventually, you'll get to the point where even just normal noises that you hear, like things within like the 100, 200 hertz range, starts to become very faint. And this is very common, very normal. And the reason why this is because those hairs that die, they don't grow back. And
entirely caused by civilization, though.
It's caused by civilization.
Because of all our loud noises and machines and stuff.
It's caused by loud noises, it's caused by machines, and it's also just caused by just normal everyday usage of your ears.
Well, not the third one. I saw a study where they found like people that lived in like untechnological societies, and they hear just fine to the end of their life.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, what do I know? Don't remember. I am not a doctor. Don't take my advice on medical stuff ever. And this is proof. Okay. So
I'm a doctor.
Yeah, that's right. Sam is technically a doctor. He should take his advice.
Technically a doctor.
Technically a doctor. So, okay. So let's go to the article. So. Coolhunting.com, you know that's a good site right there. Coolhunting.com has an article talking about, let's see, it's written by, it doesn't say, it's just by coolhunting.com.
Another sign of quality.
Another sign of quality right there. Yeah, thank you there. Anyway, so the idea is that people at MIT, so this is probably just a press release. So scientists at MIT have been able to stimulate propagator cells within the inner ear to regrow new hairs, which means that you can actually start reversing hearing loss on a fundamental level. You don't need hearing aids. You wouldn't need anything. I mean, anytime this kind of breaking new scientific procedure starts being looked at, the results really don't become publicly available for another 10 or 20 years. So I don't want to get anyone's hopes up right away, but hopefully in the future, our children and our children's children won't have to deal with hearing loss anymore. They'll just get some injections into their ears and they will be able to hear fine again.
Yeah, sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
All right, and Alan's got FISA.
Yes, everyone's favorite depressing topic, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, is in the news because the FBI apparently conducted as many as 3.4 million warrantless searches.
And how many airplanes crashed into buildings driven by terrorists?
Well, this is true.
So there you go.
That can only prove the effectiveness of these 3.4 million warrantless searches. It probably prevented 3.4 million plane crashes.
See, there you go. See, I was afraid you were going to be ungrateful there for a minute.
That's right. That's me. Always ungrateful for government surveillance.
Yes.
I mean, these reports are released all the time. Well, not all the time, but at least semi-annually, occasionally, annually, from the FBI. And what's really interesting about 2021 is that there were 3.4 million searches. But in 2020, there were only 1.3 million searches. So that is a very large difference in the number of searches during a period of time in which I don't recall there being a whole lot of terrorist activity.
And you think that's a coincidence?
Well, apparently no, it's not a coincidence.
But this means the FBI has become more efficient, right?
It's become more efficient. That's right. Maybe it's using like the full power of AWS, finally.
You know, there are these national security letters, and they would not even show any statistics, right? Because they're secret.
Yeah, very secret. But
We never find out how many of them there are, I think.
no. But I have not read through this report. And so it does go into things like US persons versus non-US persons, et cetera, et cetera. But it does bear repeating that FISA generally is very controversial. I mean, the premise of it is perfectly sufficient. I mean, you do want to be able to surveil potential foreign intelligence agents who are operating in the United States. That is an entirely legitimate target for surveillance. Unfortunately, the way it's being applied is controversial, to say the least. And that oftentimes what seems to be happening is that people who are American citizens and are inside the US are being surveilled, even while they're not doing anything that's really very explicitly illegal. Or if it is illegal, it shouldn't really fall under the purview of FISA.
Now, there's the new Biden's new Ministry of Truth is presumably going to do a lot more of this.
Oh yes, DHS.
Yeah.
Right. We can only hope. Although DHS has been very quick to point out that really this new office is more a bureaucratic, not exactly a task force, but it's just formalizing a formerly ad hoc function.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Big Brother is watching us.
Apparently so.
Probably the only one. We don't have that many customers for the podcast. Anyway,
Yes.
so the Supreme Court, it's going to be all over the news everywhere. Late last night, saw how Politico got a copy of a draft internal document from the Supreme Court showing that in February they'd already decided to overturn Roe versus Wade, and detailing exactly why. And this is the worst case. Some people thought that they would do what the Supreme Court usually does. There used to be a rule at the Supreme Court that they would not make unnecessarily broad rulings. They would try to change things as little as possible. But this Supreme Court has deviated from that very far, even going so far as to reach down and take cases that were not intended to go to the Supreme Court and use them as an excuse to pass broad rulings on the conservative side. And this one is the most extreme, saying that all the foundations of Roe versus Wade are wrong all the way back to 72, and many other similar cases are just dead wrong. And that's why people are really freaking out. It would appear that all cases, the idea is anything that was not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution cannot be added by interpretation by the Supreme Court, which is what's responsible for almost all civil rights. So all things based privacy is not in the Constitution, and birth control and abortion and many other things depend on this right to privacy, which was an interpretation, and they are reversing that. So they say many other things will fall, like gay marriage and birth control, and the explicit case they ruled on is denies women abortion even in case of rape and incest. And now they're planning the Republicans. There's 21 states are immediately going to have abortion outlawed when this passes, because they have trigger laws. As soon as it's possible, abortion is outlawed, and they're going to make it. Several states are already making abortion outlawed, even to save the life of the mother. So this really is turning us into the Republican of Gilead, where women are just brute animals owned by men, used to produce babies, and discarded if they're not useful for that purpose. And they have no say in this at all, which is very extreme. And the thing I'm noticing, this is how a society decays into autocracy, which I hadn't realized the process without living through it, because nobody wants this. The majority of Americans certainly want birth control. They want abortion to be legal. And I saw a survey a couple of days ago that showed that only like 10 to 15% of Americans actually think that anybody is teaching the wrong stuff in classes. They really don't want all this culture war stuff about how they're making your children gay in school. Neither Republicans nor Democrats actually believe that. There's a small lunatic fringe pushing this, and even they mostly don't mean it. As we can see, most of the Republican leaders were dead set against this until they saw it was popular, and then they flipped like J.D. Vance to just pick on a new fake persona. So what happens is we have a bunch of people who, for their own personal gain, are pushing an agenda that they don't want, that they don't believe in, that nobody wants. So you end up in this crazy place with a dystopian society doing stuff that is to no one's benefit. And it's interesting to see how the steps that got there appeared to be in a few powerful people's best interests at the time. So it's, I remember the interview with Mitch McConnell a couple of weeks ago where they said, well, you say you're going to support Trump, even though he did all this rotten stuff. Isn't there some moral red line? And he's just baffled. A moral red line? What would that be? So all there is getting power and getting more power. What is this morality thing you speak of? And that's clearly where we are. So we need we're going to see if anything stops it. I don't see any sign of anything stopping it. I thought until last night that the blue states would still retain some freedom, but they're now pushing hard to make national bans on things like abortion. So we're in a very dark place. And I think nothing's going to stop it unless the Democrats can actually win an election. And that seems extremely unlikely. Yes. And I don't see the remotest sign of anyone on the Republican side showing any interest in actually doing good things for the nation. They're just grabbing individual power, despite the fact that that's like setting fire to the country. It's, I see a dark future. I think it's trying to plan a good place to go, like Canada or New Zealand or something.
Or Sam, might I suggest this could be a catalyst? I know that America tends to go through swings. Like there was the McCarthyan era, for example.
Yeah, but that was not, I don't think there's ever been a swing like this, not since the Civil War.
Right. And there was the Civil War.
But that's one place it could go.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think, yes, this could be a sign of the end, but it also could be a sign of, for Americans, there's always this subset of people, subset of population that pushes and pushes and pushes. And the American sort of ideology is, well, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. And then eventually they keep pushing and pushing. And it becomes too much. And people are like, okay, no more. And you have these like watershed moments. So you have things like the Stonewall riots, for example. You have things like the, Martin Luther King's, speech. And so, there's these swings. And certainly right now, America is in a very serious swing against a lot of the civil rights gains over the past like 60 years, right? And that's really what's going on here. It's not really about abortion. It's not about any of the stuff. It's about the changes to society that have been made over the last 60 years, starting with the Civil Rights Act and the conservatives going against it. And there's going to be a backlash to this. Most Americans don't want this. And, they keep.
That would be nice. I'm not so sure, but I mean, I'm not leaving right now. I've chosen my trigger event is when they close the New York Times. Yeah. But I recommend everybody choose a trigger event, because if you don't choose one in advance, you will wait too long to escape as it just gradually heats up the water.
Yep.
But
well,
I wouldn't.
Shout out to the reactionary right. They took a weak hand where they were progressively losing power, and American demographics were very much working against them. And they flipped that to a supermajority in the Supreme Court, majorities in many of the state legislatures, legislatures that have been gerrymandered, and a national movement that's really been catalyzed by a propagandistic media outlet in Fox News. And,
and the Federalist Society is a big part of it.
Federalist Society, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the right actually had something like a 50-year plan to accomplish this and did it. Whereas the left just imagined that the natural momentum of society was going their way and didn't conspire to bring it about.
Right, very, very weak organization. Both the Democratic Party specifically and just the more left movement generally has not had a plan and hasn't been very smart in this country, and had simply assumed, I think, that the winds of change will simply prevail. And that's not how power works necessarily. Well,
I know. I mean, but the thing I think which people didn't see coming, there are intellectual right-wingers. There have been, But what they didn't see is they would lose control of this thing like a Frankenstein monster, and it would turn into a deplorable satire of what they actually wanted. And that's why all the good Republicans have jumped ship in the last 2 or 3 years as they watch the Republican Party turn into this monster that's doing no good for anybody. But the people involved have no interest in stopping it. And the voters just seem to be unable to comprehend the problem. I mean, I think the only thing that would end it is if the Republican voters eventually realize that this is not benefiting them.
I think Alan touched on something that I think is really important, is the role of outlets like Fox News has had on our current political landscape.
Yeah.
Of really having these 24/7 propaganda networks, along with, social media bubbles that radicalize, a certain percentage of our population, a small percentage, but, they live in their bubble.
Yeah.
And they think that, of
I don't
course
think
I'm
it's
right.
small.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a small percentage anymore. 80% of Republicans believe that the elections are rigged.
Yeah.
It's not a small percentage anymore.
Well, that's true. And that's the whole point, is that there are a lot of people living in alternate realities,
Yeah.
right? Like there's those of us who really value the truth and really want to, even if our quote unquote side is wrong, we want to acknowledge that. We want to know when our side is quote unquote wrong. But there's a lot of Americans who sort of have beliefs like football teams, where their beliefs should be right, and challenges to those beliefs are personal.
Yeah.
And, and we can't really have a discussion about what to do about something like what happened on January 6th, when what you said, Sam, is absolutely true, where like 80% of Republicans believe that the election was stolen. And you know what? If the election was stolen, the January 6th riots would be absolutely justified.
And that is what they say.
Yes. But of course, there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence it was stolen.
Apparently, they do not feel like evidence is required in order to believe something.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the fundamental problem, is that we're living in two different realities. And those realities are not simply the result of random chance. This is a highly thought out propaganda system designed to keep people watching, certain news channels, keep people interested in certain, media, online media, that kind of stuff. And ultimately, at a fundamental level, it's about two things. It's about maintaining political power, and it's about making money, because they know if they get people riled up and emotional about these political things, they get money. And I mean, there needs to be a point where you need to sort of step in and be like, hey, maybe, like we banned cigarettes because they were, bad for you. Maybe we should start looking at, at media and what kind of media is having an effect. So we thought like movies and video games were like having an effect on children. And we did studies after study after study. And it turned out, not so much. I mean, there's some behavioral stuff, getting angry. Like, for example, playing violent video games can raise aggression for short periods of time. But we know that because we did study after study after study, and we kind of know, and the people who make video games know in the back of their mind, what the psychological effects are. But we don't seem to have that same level of scientific rigor being applied to things like Fox News or even Twitter, even though it's all over the news, even though this stuff's all over the news. We see scientific papers being looked into things like how foreign nations propagate fake news, but there's not a whole lot of research going into the psychological effects of things that are making a lot of money for corporations. Like I said, like Fox News, Newsmax, Twitter accounts that keep people, isolated in their bubbles. And we really need to look at that and see if whether or not this is something that's really healthy, because it might be causing people to become very extreme without them knowing it.
Well, I think it is, but I think a government attempt to control it is not going to help. That's what Biden is trying to do, is his disinformation department. But I don't think they're going to be able to stop it. I don't think they understand what they're doing well enough.
Well, yeah. I mean, the other thing too is, once again, this is the disinformation department, not, looking at like propaganda channels. So like, once again, its focus is on things like foreign nations sending out fake, information because we all know that's bad. And we don't want, like, for example, China influencing our political discourse. But we're not looking at American homegrown influences of discourse for the sake of increasing profits, getting people angry and watching.
Yeah, but any attempt to censor or stamp that out is almost certainly going to lead to the disaster we're trying to prevent.
Well, yeah, I mean, and not, like I said, I'm not trying to say that the government should step in, but I feel like if we could have studies that would show, like that smoking is bad. Like we haven't banned cigarettes, right? But people know, and the government can step in and put things on news channels like this news channel has been shown to cause, extremism, and stuff like that, and just put warnings on stuff so people know what they're getting into when they start watching Fox News. And if people are into that, fine, go ahead. But I think there's a lot of people, especially older people, that I've seen, they get into these either, and it can happen on the left too, but get into these like circles of media bias, and they just get so into it, and they think that the world is ending. And they're the saviors of the planet because they're watching Tucker Carlson or they're a Democrat and whatever. And it's like, are you really aware of the processes they go on to make this news as emotionally influential as possible? Like they are influencing your emotions as much as possible to get you to keep watching the news over and over again. And are you aware of that? Are you really aware of that? And are you really in control at a certain point?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Well, you bring about one silver lining of this, which is it's great for sociologists to study us. We're like an interesting disease now to be studied. That's one good side of it.
We're like a disease.
How do societies collapse? Now we finally have one with all this data and records and digital records of everything that happened, as opposed to, you have to sort of guess what made Rome collapse, but now we can see in great detail how it works.
Yeah. Well, like I said, hopefully this won't be a complete collapse. There will be pushback. America goes through swings right now. It's just a big conservative swing. We'll bounce back. Hopefully, I think what I'm really hoping for in the end, and this is me just being an optimist, is that we'll finally, after this is all over, we'll finally have like gay rights, women's rights, and just civil rights in general for racial equality in the Constitution, like just amendments to the Constitution.
Yeah, we could never even pass the ERA.
Yeah, and I think now that the Supreme Court has been is not trustworthy enough to maintain civil rights, I think once there's enough of a pushback, against what's going on, I'm hoping that we'll finally get this passed through Congress and then just ratified in the Constitution, because this is no bueno.
Yeah,
just point out that thanks to congressional gerrymandering, that's highly unlikely.
Yes, that's why one path to it is like, I listen to Andrew Yang. He's got a path to it, but it will take decades.
Yeah. There's no easy, quick solutions to this. Nothing's going to happen within a decade. Yeah. And you're right, Alan, the fundamental problem with American politics at this moment is not the Supreme Court. It's not the conservative swing. It's money in politics and corruption in politics and gerrymandering and stuff like that. And if we really had open and free elections, such that every candidate had a equal amount of money to spend, and if we had things like ranked choice voting, stuff like that, I mean, we really wouldn't be in this situation. Because why are we in this situation? Because someone with a lot of money, I'm not going to mention who, ran for president, lost the popular vote, got impeached twice, and still managed to get 3 people on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I feel like that narrows it down just a bit. But anyway.
Yeah, I'm not going to mention who this was, because I really do try to, be politically neutral on this podcast.
Well, it's not working, in case you're interested. All right. Well, anyway, we can go back to you. You've got the CDC looking out for our welfare.
Yeah, so this is very interesting. Vice has an article written by Joseph Cox, who has been on this podcast before, talking about, or not on this podcast, or I should say mentioned on this podcast before.
Yeah.
No, I don't. We've never met Joseph. He sounds like a nice person. We'd love to have him on. Joseph, if you're listening, come on to our podcast. So what happened? So the CDC has been following Americans using their cell phone data. to see if they've been following lockdown orders and creating mountains of data and stuff to do research and for the next pandemic that comes up, so we can like study behavior. So where are they getting this data? They got it from a data broker called SafeGraph, and this the CDC paid $420,000 to get access to this data, and Google banned the company from the Google Play Store. I mean, this is some shady stuff. What's really interesting is that, of course, this is the CDC. And honestly, if the CDC wants to look at how Americans are following lockdown orders by buying data, whatever. I mean, that's
legal. Isn't it violating the Fourth Amendment or something?
I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, that's the thing, though. That's what makes this story interesting, is that here we have an example of a government agency who, has a legitimate reason for wanting this data and is not going to use it to like prey on people or anything like that. They just want to know how to handle the next pandemic. Cool. I mean, I'm okay with this, but it's just as easy. If the CDC could pay $420,000, why can't advertising companies? Why can't Google? Why can't Facebook?
They totally do.
And they totally do and would. And that's the thing, is that certainly, yeah, you can, this creates quite a problem in that you can create these massive data points of all Americans, what they're doing, where they're going, and it can be used for good, for sure. Certainly it can, but it could also be used by shadier people. And I like I said, I like this article because it's looking at something that's obviously a violation of privacy, but the person involved in that violation of privacy is the CDC. And ultimately, I think you can make a good case that the CDC would make very good use of this data. But other companies, other private individuals, for example, they really wouldn't. And, it creates a lot of interesting philosophical and ethical considerations.
I have a lot less confidence in the goodness of the CDC than you, but anyway.
I mean, I know the CDC can be, wiffly waffly. They change. I mean, for some reason, they're filled with a bunch of these goddamn scientists who change their goddamn mind whenever the data changes or updates.
No, not that. They're actually ruled by political appointés.
And they, and they have political appointees
to please the political desires of the authority figures.
Yes, and that too. Yes.
Yeah.
They also have to play politics as well. I understand.
So, I mean, if the president was to say, for my reelection, I could use that location data to target my ads, just hand it over. It's not clear to me that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, and so we need to figure out, we have the capability of collecting this data. How do we decide where this data should go? Who should be able to use it, and why? Should it be locked up for everybody?
Yeah, we need privacy legislation.
Yeah, but on the other hand, like, let's say, once again, like, what if the CDC is doing some legitimate research on lockdown studies?
Well, that's why we need privacy legislation, and it needs to be intelligent.
Right.
We can imitate GDPR. I'm not sure how intelligent it is, but it's probably better than what we have.
Probably. So, I mean, ideally, you would want some sort of legislation, privacy legislation, that is not a blanket ban, but would allow certain types of, like, research to be done, for public safety type stuff. Like if you are trying to track people who maybe have been hit by a hurricane and you want to know where they are, you might be able to use that to get search and rescue to their location. If they can't, do whatever, search for them, you might want to have the CDC do studies on people's locations, but at the same time, you don't want, private companies to like spy on people and like try to figure out what you're going to buy and like do these targeted ads and stuff that people don't want, or like invade their privacy and sell that data for like lots of money. I mean, it's, I don't know what kind of legislation we could type up to let that happen, but it's not a yes or no philosophically easy, discussion to be had.
No, certainly not. All right, Alan's got Operation G.
Yes, this is a 25-page paper from the Royal United Services Institute, published a couple of weeks ago, analyzing the military progress of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and also looking at some of the domestic Russian economic and propaganda efforts. And it's a very interesting analysis. It's a long read, of course, but it provides a lot of information and context that is often left out of news reports. In particular, it looks at some of the military tactics on the battlefield and finds that although a lot of attention has been paid to the portable anti-armor weapons such as the Javelin, it's really the Ukrainian artillery that has been most effective in blunting the progress of Russian forces. But it also takes a look at the state of Moldova and what's going on with possibly a Russian invasion of that. It looks at some of the political dynamics at play there. Doesn't draw a lot of conclusions about the likelihood of a Russian invasion of Moldova and Transnistria, but it seems unlikely that will happen at this point. It also
don't think they're going to invade Moldova. I thought that was pretty much the plan.
Pardon?
I thought they did plan to invade Moldova.
Well, I suppose you could argue that Russia was responsible for Transnistria's breakoff.
Yeah,
what,
and I
30
think they
years
planned
ago.
to,
so
yeah, and I thought they planned to invade it again this time, but
yes, except the consensus among analysts seems to be that Russia is in no state to be embarking on yet another expansionist war when it's pretty badly losing the one it's currently engaged in.
yep. But they like to do stupid things, though. But go ahead.
Well, yes, the military is not in good shape, shall we say?
Their leadership is not in good shape.
To say nothing of the leadership and the economy.
Yeah.
Which is also a point of focus in this report. Now, perhaps the most interesting thing of this, though, is at the end of the report, there's an appendix or an annex that is an analysis of the components of the Borisogledsk-2 electronic warfare armored, I don't know what to call it, device. It's a tracked vehicle mounted with a number of antenna masts mounted to it, and it's used for jamming and GPS jamming.
Oh, this thing is great.
Yeah, well, it's a very complex, advanced system that has been developed in the past 20 years and has really been fielded only since 2015 by the Russian military. And Ukrainian intelligence has captured one of these and done a teardown. And they have, I guess, shared this information with Rusi. And so you can see at the end of this report, a number of subsystems that rely on Western-made components. And so you can take a look at the breakdown with including part numbers of various components that are made in the US and that are now, at least in theory, inaccessible to Russia due to sanctions.
So what does this thing do? Does it jam all the communications or something?
Yeah, that's the idea. It's supposed to jam, it's electronic warfare, so it's supposed to jam signals, including GPS and general communication systems.
It looks like a tank with two 50-foot antennas on it. I wonder why they have to be so big.
Well, I don't know. They probably need to have pretty good range. So
I guess
50 miles, 100 miles range, whatever. So they need sizable antennas, and they need to have some fairly sophisticated electronics inside too. Although I noticed that they're using an Intel Celeron chip from like 15 years ago. So it's not like everything is exactly, premium, at least by today's standards. And a lot of the components that are supposedly covered under sanctions, you can buy off of like DigiKey. I looked this up. So it wouldn't be that hard to sidestep the sanctions. Not everything in here is, super exotic by any stretch. Nevertheless, there aren't many examples like this of a high-tech advanced electronic warfare system with a part breakdown. So this is an interesting insight, not only into the state of the war and the state of Russian politics and strategy, military strategy especially, but it's also a really interesting look at some of the electronic warfare and high-tech components of this war.
Yeah, good information. All right, and so they're having a heat wave in India and Pakistan, which they say is testing the limits of human survivability with temperatures like 114, and the garbage dumps. The garbage dump 17 stories high just spontaneously combusts. And they say, oh, this is happening like 4 times a year at all the garbage dumps. So, Greta Thunberg was sharing this saying, you guys should really think about doing something about climate change. It's really getting out of hand. And it certainly is, although right now other considerations seem to be taking priority, but I'm afraid it will always be that way. But climate change will continue to get worse until we actually pay attention to it. Anyway, and so back to Kaitlyn. Kaitlyn has got them, catching their booster with a helicopter.
Yeah, so we have another way of reducing space costs. So back in the 1980s, everyone remembers the space shuttle. That thing was awesome. And the whole idea about the space shuttle is that it was so expensive to send up rockets. They come down, they crash, and then that's it. And we could actually have something reusable. Unfortunately, it wasn't as reusable as we thought. It was also a little dangerous, very dangerous, I should say. And it took a few more decades, but we're finally getting some really interesting solutions to the reusable rocket problem. So we've already seen from SpaceX that they can land rockets like in the middle of the sea or back on launch pads again. There's another interesting idea, which is to catch the rockets midair. So the New York Times has an article written by Kenneth Chang talking about a company called Rocket Lab, where what they do is they send up a helicopter and they catch the rocket as it's coming back down midair, which seems like it should be safer and easier on the rocket components. As well as not requiring the rocket to have extra fuel and have nothing go wrong and have it not like land and blow up on the launch pad. Like one of the issues I've seen with the landing on the launch pad again is that one, you have to sort of restart the rocket engines, which requires really engineering the whole thing around that final stage. So you can't just send it up and then with like hydrogen and oxygen fuel, because that can sometimes be difficult to spark and get going again after it's been ignited. So they use some pretty nasty stuff in their rockets. The other thing, of course, is that even with that, even using the right fuel and everything, sometimes, things just go wrong. And I've seen a lot of the SpaceX rockets come down and come down and come down, land on the launch pad and blow up. Great job, SpaceX. It was really funny. So one time they were testing out some of their new rockets over at SpaceX, and they had the rocket, come down, and I guess they predetermined that the title underneath the screen was going to be like, "Great job, SpaceX team." So they had the rocket come down, and landed on the launch pad, completely blew up. It came down too fast. And like, there's this smoldering, like gigantic fireball and like ashes raining down everywhere. And on the bottom of the screen, it said, "Great job, SpaceX team." I loved it.
Spontaneous, unplanned disassembly.
Yes, spontaneous, unplanned disassembly via litho braking. But yeah, so this seems like a safer option. You can, like I said, you don't really have to design the whole rocket engine around the final return phase. The issue, of course, is just getting it lined up and catching it. But they did it, and this is now another way of reusing rockets, which is the primary way of making space travel cheaper. Is because imagine if every time you used an airplane, you would have to like take it apart and like rebuild a new one. Yep. That's what happens that's why space travel is so expensive. You have to build an airplane every time you want to fly, or a rocket every time you want to fly, and things are going down in cost dramatically because now we can just reuse them. And so, excellent job for real this time.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking it must be fun for the helicopter pilot. Okay, this thing is falling down from space, and you have to catch it.
Yeah, just catch the rocket in the helicopter. No big deal.
Yeah, I think it has a parachute anyway.
It does, yeah. But even so, you don't want to hit it in the water. You want it And if you actually look at the photo, you'll see that it looks like the helicopter catches the rocket by the parachute.
Right. Yeah. All right. And Alan has got the Pandemocene, which seems like a real hellscape concept.
Yes, indeed. It's a real word. And well, I mean, we've heard, of course, about how humans are responsible for the deaths of potentially millions of species, and so on and so forth. But of course, climate change also will produce some interesting results, shall we say, in the world of virology. As species are forced to move, they bring with them the viruses that they carry in their bodies. And there are perhaps 10,000 different virus species that have the capacity to infect humans, but maybe haven't had the chance to infect humans just yet because humans haven't come into contact with the hosts, with the animals that are carrying these different viruses. But thanks to climate change, those viruses will get their chance because the animals are moving as the climate changes and their home ranges become inhospitable. They have to move elsewhere. And according to the study entitled Climate Change Increases Cross-Species Viral Transmission Risk, the authors, using computer simulations, among other techniques, have found that perhaps counterintuitively, as animals have to move out of their home ranges, yes, they'll come into contact with other species, but not because they're all moving north. And so the focus of cross-species infection will not be in, say, the Arctic, but will instead be in areas where you have a lot of mountain ranges. So you have topological features in which you have animals moving up in altitude while other animals are already at altitude. And so you have populations that formerly never would have come into contact, coming into contact with each other, and thereby transmitting their viruses to one another. Now, this may sound like a rather abstract and academic problem, but you have to remember that in fact, almost all of the major diseases, viral diseases that infect humans originated with animals. There have been only a few major ones that seem to be in humans only, such as smallpox and syphilis. Everything else, from HIV to tuberculosis, oh, that's not a virus, to SARS, coronavirus, those all came from animals originally. And so this means that certain populations of animals that previously were quite isolated now are not going to be so isolated. And so you have animals such as bats in Southeast Asia, which formerly were quite isolated, now coming into contact with other animals. And so that is a likely hotspot in Southeast Asia, also Central Africa. So we can expect more pandemics in the future, is the long and the short of it.
Yep. And hopefully more high-tech vaccines to fight them, I guess.
Yes. Although this study only looked at viruses and not, say, bacteria or fungi.
Yep. All right. And this last one is an idea I brought up a while ago. Oh, yeah.
Before you go on, I was going to say, Alan, that actually makes a lot of sense. I've heard a lot of studies where biologists look at mountain ranges to discover speciation, because a lot of times those mountain ranges really act as barriers between two separate populations. And so, you know, if suddenly those populations start to become in contact again by going over those mountain ranges, I can see how that would, you know, cause a lot of problems. So
yes.
I was thinking
Yes.
if they all take a lesson from Republicans and build walls and keep out the migrants, that would be one solution. But anyway, they can't
Well,
really
those
expect
walls
all
are
the
going to have
animals.
to be extremely high because birds are responsible for.
Well, yeah, the birds and the bats are a problem. You just have to wipe them out.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
with EMP pulses for sure.
Yeah. Well. All right. And anyway, I talked about this a few weeks ago with Kaitlyn. I said you could use the sun as a lens And they figured it out, but she said the Earth is in the wrong place. And apparently that's true. This guy did make a plan of how you could use the sun as a telescope with gravity lensing to get a detailed picture of exoplanets, but you do have to take a probe and send it out to the right focal length, which it turns out is 10 times further away than Pluto, further than we've ever gone. But that's where you'd have to sit to catch the light focused. And he said, if you did that, you could get a picture of an exoplanet that was, where you could see the whole thing and see all the details and stuff. It would be great. So,
yep, all we have to do is send a probe out 10 times further than Pluto. And
how hard would that be?
Actually, not as hard as you would think. It's just a very long process.
Yeah.
And the problem is, and I think we talked about this, when you get a probe that far out, positioning it is a big problem. So you don't want to send out one probe. You should send out like a million, because they all have to be like orbiting at different parts of the thing, because you can't really move it to the other side of the sun over the course of like a human lifespan, or 2 or 3 or 10.
It sounds like something for Elon Musk to do after he's done colonizing Mars.
Yeah, or maybe Amazon with their super amazing Kuiper mission, which I'm totally down about and I think is amazing. They can work on
the Kuiper belt.
No, the Kuiper. So Amazon is putting up their own satellite network called Kuiper.
Okay, but
they're not going to, but
not in the Kuiper belt.
Not in the Kuiper belt. Yeah. They should. That would be awesome. Amazon would like totally become like the biggest, richest company in the world if they did crazy, awesome space missions like that.
Well, then you'd be prepared to be like the world industry leader in like the year 4000, but before then you wouldn't make any money.
Well, I mean, they would have positioned themselves, to be like the dominant technological backbone of like the Kuiper belt. And like anyone in the future that goes out there would have to pay Amazon money. I mean, they could totally do that.
Well, I could see, wouldn't it be great to move into somewhere and find out that there was like 2,000-year-old technology already deployed? You'd be grateful for that.
I know exactly. It would be awesome.
Yeah.
And we could send all our plutonium, to Amazon to send out to the Kuiper belt to be used, 200, 300 years from now. I mean,
yeah. Well, so their Kuiper mission is lower satellites, right?
Yes.
So they has the wrong name.
It does have, well, I mean, I think the name is pretty cool, but I think it's named after the astronomer rather than the place.
Well, nevertheless. All right. Anyway, well, that's it for this one, and we'll be back on Friday.